I never expected that a simple favor for my best friend would unravel into something that would shake me to my core. When Jake asked me to help his father, I assumed it was something straightforward, maybe running errands, handling a business matter, or something minor. I had no idea what I was walking into. Jake and I had been friends since college, the kind of bond that felt unbreakable. We looked out for each other, no matter what. That's why, when he called me one evening, his voice unusually tense, I didn't hesitate to listen. "Hey man, my dad's in a tough spot. He needs some help with business stuff, and I can't be there. You're good with numbers and organization. Could you step in?" Jake's father, William Reynolds, was a man of stature. At 52, he was the kind of guy who commanded a room without saying much. He ran a successful chain of high-end restaurants, dressed like money, and had the kind of confidence that came from always being in control. I'd met him a handful of times before, but we weren't close. I agreed without thinking twice. After all, it was just business. How complicated could it be? The next day, I arrived at Reynolds Enterprises, one of his sleek corporate offices downtown. The moment I walked in, I felt it, something was off. The atmosphere was tense, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. William Reynolds sat behind a massive glass desk. His piercing blue eyes locked onto me the second I entered. He was sharp, his tailored suit immaculate, but there was something different about him now, an edge, a weight pressing down on him. "You must be Nathan," he said, his voice smooth but carrying an undercurrent of exhaustion. "Jake speaks highly of you." "Happy to help, sir." I kept it professional, but I could feel his gaze measuring me, assessing whether I was up to the task. He gestured for me to sit. "I'll be honest. I need someone I can trust. My usual assistant is unavailable, and I have a lot on my plate." He didn't elaborate on what unavailable meant, but the way he said it made me wonder. For the next hour, he walked me through his expectations. Handling correspondence, organizing meetings, and overseeing some minor operational task. It was nothing beyond my skill set, but the way he spoke made it sound like his entire world was on the verge of collapse. Then, as we wrapped up, he sighed, rubbing his temple. "This is all temporary. Just until I handle some personal matters." The way he hesitated told me it wasn't just business weighing on him. Over the next few days, I settled into my role. It was easy work, but the tension surrounding Mr. Reynolds never faded. He took mysterious calls, his voice low, urgent. He left the office at odd hours and returned looking restless. And the biggest red flag? Jake's mother was never mentioned. Not once. From what I knew, Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds had been married for over 25 years. I had met her before, a graceful, warm woman who seemed the perfect complement to her powerful husband. But here, in his office, it was as if she didn't exist. And then came the first real sign that something was seriously wrong. It was late, almost 9 at night, and I was finishing up some paperwork when I heard footsteps outside the office door. I assumed it was Mr. Reynolds getting ready to leave, but then I heard a woman's voice, low, sultry, and too familiar with him. "Will, you need to relax," she said, the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor. "You're too tense." He sighed, his voice softer than I had ever heard. "You don't make that easy." She laughed, a laugh that held secret. Curiosity got the best of me. I turned slightly, catching a glimpse through the office door left slightly ajar. And that's when I saw her. A woman, stunning, poised, radiating confidence. She was younger than Mr. Reynolds but carried herself like she owned the world. Her dark hair framed striking features, and when she placed a hand on his chest, I saw the way his shoulders relaxed, the tension melting away like she had some kind of power over him. This wasn't a business meeting. I felt like I had stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to see. Quickly turned back to my work, forcing my mind to process what I had just witnessed. The logical part of me said it wasn't my business. Whatever Mr. Reynolds did in his personal life was his choice. But then there was Jake. That thought unsettled me more than anything. A few minutes later, I heard the woman leave, her laughter echoing as she disappeared down the hall. Mr. Reynolds stepped into my view, adjusting his tie, looking different, more alive, almost like a man with a secret that made him feel untouchable. He glanced at me, and for a second, I wondered if he could tell that I knew. "Late night?" I asked casually, keeping my tone even. He smirked, the ghost of something unreadable in his expression. "Just handling some unfinished business." I nodded, forcing myself to look away. I should have walked away then. I should have told Jake something felt off. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed. And that was my first mistake. I should have walked away. I should have told Jake that his father was involved with another woman. But something about the way William Reynolds carried himself made me hesitate. He wasn't a desperate man clinging to a fleeting thrill. He was a man in control, a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And yet, the way he looked at her, that wasn't control. That was need. The next few days blurred into a strange routine. I handled work as usual, but now I was aware of the undercurrent of secrecy running beneath every interaction. Mr. Reynolds was careful, but not careful enough. I saw the text messages he tried to hide. I noticed the way his demeanor shifted before and after their encounters. And most of all, I saw her. Her name was Sophia Carter. A name that now lingered in my thoughts far longer than it should have. She was intoxicating in the way that dangerous things often are. When she entered the office, the energy shifted. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, she commanded attention. The first time we spoke, it was brief. A simple exchange of pleasantries as she waited for Mr. Reynolds. But in that moment, I realized something unsettling. She knew exactly what she was doing. "You must be Nathan," she said, her voice smooth, laced with amusement. "Will mentioned you." "Will?" "Not Mr. Reynolds." "Will?" I nodded, keeping my expression unreadable. "I handle some business affairs for him." She tilted her head, studying me. "That must be interesting. I imagine you learn a lot in your position." Something about the way she said it made my skin prickle. Was she testing me? Mr. Reynolds stepped into the room then, his presence shifting the dynamic instantly. He barely acknowledged me, his entire focus on her. I should have looked away. But I didn't. Over the following weeks, Sophia became a constant presence. She wasn't just a fling, she was a storm, and Mr. Reynolds had willingly stepped into it. And whether I liked it or not, I was being pulled in, too. There was a night when I was working late, sorting through reports, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting Mr. Reynolds. But it was her. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked, leaning against the doorway. I forced a neutral smile. "Someone has to keep things running." She stepped inside, moving closer, too close. "Will's at a dinner meeting. I was waiting for him, but I got bored." The way she said it sent a pulse of unease through me. "I'm sure he won't be long." She watched me, her gaze assessing. "You're different from the men I usually meet here." I exhaled slowly. "I just do my job." She smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "That's what makes you interesting." The air in the room thickened, the space between us charged with something unspoken. It wasn't just that she was attractive. It was the way she carried herself, the way she saw people. And I realized then, she knew I had seen them together. From that night on, I noticed a shift. She was watching me. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone else would catch. But I felt it. Passing glances that lasted a second too long. A touch on the arm that felt deliberate. A comment that lingered with a double meaning. And worst of all, I didn't stop it. The logical part of me screamed to keep my distance. But another part, the reckless part, was drawn in. One evening, Mr. Reynolds left early for an out-of-town business trip, and Sophia showed up unannounced at the office. "I thought I'd find you here," she said, closing the door behind her. I put down my pen, wary. "Something I can help you with?" She walked toward my desk, her heels clicking against the floor, each step deliberate. I think we've been avoiding a conversation. I exhaled. About what? She sat on the edge of my desk, crossing her legs, eyes locked onto mine. About the fact that you've been watching me as much as I've been watching you. I felt my pulse quicken. There it was. No games. No pretense. Just blunt honesty. You're involved with Mr. Reynolds, I said evenly, ignoring the heat in my chest. She smirked. I'm aware. Her confidence was unnerving. She wasn't nervous, wasn't ashamed. She was enjoying this. And against every bit of common sense, so was I. She reached out, her fingers barely grazing mine on the desk. You're an interesting man, Nathan. I should have pulled away. I should have shut it down. But I didn't. Instead, I held her gaze, the air between us electric. This wasn't just temptation. It was inevitability. And then, just as quickly as she had closed the space, she pulled back. She stood, smoothing her dress. Not tonight, she said, voice teasing. But soon. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving me gripping the edge of my desk, my mind racing. As I sat there, heart pounding, reality crashed over me. This was wrong. So wrong. Mr. Reynolds trusted me. Jake was my best friend. If this went any further, I would be betraying them both. And yet, despite every reason to walk away, I wasn't sure I wanted to. I told myself it wouldn't happen. I told myself that whatever was building between Sophia and me, the glances, the tension, the silent understanding that we were playing with fire, would remain just that, unspoken temptation. But that's the thing about temptation. The more you resist, the stronger it pulls. And I didn't resist hard enough. It was a Friday evening. The office was empty except for me, finishing up reports, and Sophia, who had come in under the pretense of waiting for William. I knew better. She leaned against the desk across from mine, swirling a glass of whiskey in her hand, his whiskey. She had poured herself a drink from his private collection like she owned the place. You work too much, she mused, watching me over the rim of her glass. I smirked. Someone has to. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. You really think you're different, don't you? I looked up. What's that supposed to mean? She tilted her head, studying me in that way she always did, like she was peeling back layers. You pretend you're just an observer in all of this. Like you're not already involved. I swallowed. I'm not. She smirked. Lying to yourself doesn't suit you, Nathan. I should have left right then. Walked out, put space between us. But instead, I sat there, letting the moment stretch between us like a taut wire ready to snap. And then she stood, slowly, deliberately, and walked toward me. I didn't move. Not when she stopped just inches away. Not when she reached out and ran a single finger along the cuff of my sleeve. Not even when she whispered, "Tell me to leave." I opened my mouth. No words came. She smiled, like she had known the answer before I did. Then she kissed me. I didn't resist. I didn't even hesitate. It wasn't soft, wasn't tentative. It was heat and urgency, all the tension we'd ignored finally breaking free. Her hands tangled in my hair, mine gripped her waist, pulling her closer as if she hadn't already wrecked every boundary I thought I had. I should have stopped it. Should have remembered who she belonged to. But the moment was bigger than reason, bigger than consequences. And I let it consume me. The next morning, I woke up tangled in sheets that weren't mine, in a room that smelled like expensive perfume and regret. Sophia lay beside me, one bare shoulder exposed, her dark hair spread across the pillow. She looked untouched by guilt. I, on the other hand, felt like I had just detonated my own life. I sat up, running a hand through my hair, my mind racing. What the hell had I done? I had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a betrayal. Of William. Of Jake. Of whatever moral code I still had left. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, needing to get out, needing distance. But before I could move, her voice stopped me. Regretting it already? I turned to see her watching me, amusement flickering in her eyes. I exhaled, rubbing my temple. This was Inevitable, she interrupted, sitting up and draping the sheet over herself. You can pretend you didn't want this, Nathan. But we both know that would be a lie. I stood, grabbing my shirt from the chair. This was a mistake. She smirked, completely unbothered. If it was, you wouldn't still be standing here. I clenched my jaw. She wasn't wrong. Over the next week, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. Tried to go to work like I hadn't just burned every unspoken rule to ash. But nothing was the same. Sophia didn't play coy. She didn't pretend like what happened was some fleeting, regrettable accident. She made sure I felt it. A lingering touch when she passed by my desk. A knowing smile when Mr. Reynolds walked into the room. A text late at night that simply read, "Thinking about you." She was relentless. And I was weak. Because no matter how much I tried to push it away, I wanted more. And then, just as I was drowning in the weight of it all, Jake called me. "Hey man." His voice was casual, but there was something off. "What's up?" I tried to sound normal, though my pulse spiked immediately. Jake hesitated. That wasn't like him. "You been around my dad a lot lately," he said finally. Not a question. A statement. I swallowed. "Yeah. You asked me to help him out, remember?" A pause. Too long of a pause. "Yeah," he said slowly. "And you've seen her?" Ice ran through my veins. I forced a steady breath. "Who?" Another pause. Then, "You know who I mean." My grip tightened around the phone. He knew. Or at least, he suspected. And suddenly, the affair wasn't just a secret between Sophia and me anymore. It was a ticking time bomb. One that was about to explode. Guilt is a slow poison. It starts as a whisper, a nagging thought in the back of your mind. Then it grows louder, twisting in your gut, turning every glance, every conversation, into a reminder of what you've done. By the time Jake called me, I was already drowning in it. His words replayed in my mind, over and over, "You've seen her?" I had managed to deflect, keeping my voice steady, my answers vague. But the damage was done. Jake suspected something. And if he was asking me about it, that meant he was asking other people too. I had to end this. That night, I met Sophia at a quiet rooftop bar overlooking the city. It was our usual place. Dim lighting, high-end clientele, the kind of spot where no one asked questions. She sipped her wine, watching me carefully. "You look like a man with something on his mind." I exhaled, gripping my glass. Jake knows something's off. She didn't even flinch. "So?" I blinked, taken aback by her calmness. "So? If he keeps digging, it's only a matter of time before." She leaned forward, smirking. "Before what, Nathan? He finds out his father has a mistress? That's hardly shocking." I clenched my jaw. "It's not just about his father. It's about us." She let the words settle, swirling her glass. "You're getting cold feet." I ran a hand down my face, frustration boiling beneath my skin. This was never supposed to happen. She set her glass down and leaned in, her voice lower. "Then why did it?" I had no answer. Because the truth was, I wanted her. Even now, when I knew it was all about to fall apart. She reached for my hand, her touch soft, dangerous. "Nathan, stop fighting it. You and I both know, this was inevitable." I pulled my hand away. "No. It was a mistake." For the first time, her expression changed. Amusement faded, replaced by something colder. Sharper. "Is that what you'll say when Jake finds out?" she asked. I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" She picked up her phone and, with a slow smile, turned the screen toward me. A message thread. Between her and Jake. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears as I read the text. "Jake, we need to talk. I know something's going on. Sophia, name a time and place." My stomach twisted. "You talked to him?" She shrugged, completely unfazed. "He reached out to me. He's not as clueless as you think." I shot to my feet. "You played me." Her smirk returned, but this time, it wasn't teasing. It was cruel. "Nathan, don't be dramatic. You played yourself." I could barely hear over the blood rushing in my ears. You wanted this to happen. You wanted him to find out. She tilted her head. And what if I did? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about an affair. This was a game to her. I had been a pawn. And now, the final move was about to be played. The moment of reckoning. I barely made it out of the bar before my phone rang. Jake. I hesitated, then answered. Hey! Where are you? His voice was sharp, controlled, too controlled. I swallowed. I know, Nathan. The words sent ice down my spine. I know about my dad, he continued. And I know about you. I closed my eyes. It was over. Jake. Don't. His voice hardened. You had every chance to tell me. Every damn chance. And instead, you chose her. I had never heard him like this. Not Jake, the guy who had my back since college. Not my best friend. I forced a breath. It wasn't supposed to happen. He let out a bitter laugh. Yeah? Well, it did. And now you have to live with it. The line went dead. And just like that, everything shattered. The next morning, I walked into the office, half expecting Mr. Reynolds to be waiting for me, ready to tear me apart. Instead, I found his office empty. The assistant gave me a nervous glance. He's taking a leave of absence. I stiffened. For how long? She hesitated. Indefinitely. I didn't have to ask why. I already knew. Jake had told him. And just like that, everything Mr. Reynolds had built, the control, the secrecy, the careful facade, was gone. I turned, making my way toward the exit, but before I could leave, she appeared. Sophia. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. So, that's it. I stared at her. The woman who had wrecked my life. The woman I had let wreck my life. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. You got what you wanted, didn't you? She didn't deny it. I exhaled. Stay the hell away from me. For the first time, she looked almost disappointed. You'll be back. I didn't answer. I just walked out. Because for the first time in weeks, I finally knew the truth. There was no going back.